Hey everybody, welcome to Chess on the Brain. So let's go ahead and analyze Neal Bruce's game. He was the first person to submit his game. I promised I would analyze your games if you send them to me. He's the first one. I actually just started doing it for like half an hour. I thought I would be fancy with that screen, what do you call it, the shortcut on the keyboard. This is my first time uh, doing this on OBS. So I did that little shortcut, and unfortunately, it didn't work out. But it was a good warm up. I'm totally warmed up right now, and good to go. And I'll probably give you fewer sidelines and just get to the point. So let's analyze this game. So I promised you, yesterday I did my first YouTube video. I said, hey, send me your games for free analysis. I basically want, I guess, what is it? It's like open source chess analysis. So just send me your game and I'll analyze it. And ideally, we can analyze it together. Maybe if you, I don't know, we can do one of those live streaming sessions. I guess there's some way. I'm still trying to figure out the technology. But anyways, let's jump into it. So send me your games and I'll do more of those. So I have 3 submissions so far. And I pretty much actually did the same thing, but just on a blog, not a vlog, just a regular blog on chess.com. So I said, what's the best chess game you ever played? And I actually got a pretty big response to that. That was back in 2016. And I got 13 submissions. So basically, rather than, I guess you could say an elitist approach. I mean, hey, it's great. Learn the, world champions games. I think that's one of the key elements of my teaching. I really like to teach the world champions games. But at the same time, I mean, look, we all play awesome games sometimes. Like there have been so many masters that have played games that are worthy of, just as much recognition as a lot of the world champions games. So learn from the world champions, try to, model off that. But at the same time, let's appreciate our own games. So you see, like, you have games from some 1800 players, a 1300 who beat a 2000. It was pretty cool, and they all gave me, almost all of them gave me their own analysis. So they just gave me the PGN, the file, and I just plugged it in there. So check it out. That's kind of the first version of this, the sort of democratized chess analysis of everyone's games matter. So Shecky Cat, he gave me 2 of them. He had some pretty cool wins, very tactical. Yeah, so check it out. You can find it on if you just Google like David Bennett's chess blog, or I speak Spanish, so I said El Tenedor, the fork. I always like that one. So I have that one, and just since we're on that topic, I'll just plug in this. You might find it useful. A lot of people said this helped them a lot. Or I talked about how I became a master. So basically, this was also 2016. Said I just turned the national, hopefully international title, not yet, international candidate master, which is the 2200 in the World Chess Federation. But nationally, I'm just a national master. 2200, or sorry, FIDE, which is the World Chess Federation's 2200, and domestically I'm also 2200. So yeah, but I want to get to 2300. So it's a lot harder because FIDE, they say it's like USCF is inflated. So if you're 2300 FIDE, you might be like 2400 USCF. So right now I'm like 2240 USCF. So I'd have to be a 2300 USCF just to get back to where I was at back when I first became candidate master, like in 2007. So it's going to take a little work, but I'm hoping I could get it this summer. This summer, get playing a few tournaments would be a good opportunity. So kind of, join me in that journey. We're all taking the journey together. So I'll analyze my games, I'll analyze your games. And just check this out if you think you might gain from it. Just talk about psychological factors, some of the things that worked for me, books I read. I'm really big on chess books, not just watching YouTube videos, for example. I think that's cool. I've always liked chess YouTube videos. But I do think it's good to, just to sit down with a book. That's how I started chess. Like when I really got into it in ninth grade, I picked up Chess for Dummies. Just sit down with that book, get a board in front of you, and play them out. Actually try to even like look at the sidelines. That there's various other lines that could have happened. Try and do that in your head if you can. Just a little bit at the beginning, but if you build on that, it could be really helpful. So anyway, check out that one's, if you just go through the same blog, El Tenedor, David Bennett chess blog. You could find that one too. I'm getting whatever level you're trying to get to. I think if you're trying to break through to any level, some of the psychological things, I think some of this is universal, like writing down your lessons. Ideally, you get some coaching or use an engine, some chess computer to analyze your games, and then really like condense it. Write down what the issues were. Sort of do some chess journaling, and then write down what you learned, and have maybe like on your phone or a note card or something that you can review before each game, putting it in a positive way. This is what I need to do, and then it sort of just start training your mind. So things like that could be useful. So let's get to his game. Now, this is Neal Bruce, BC, I guess maybe British Columbia. So he's a really cool guy on Twitter. We became Twitter friends recently. I guess you call it friends, or we've been we've been going back and forth with some ideas, and really hit it off on there. So, and he sent me his game when I put out my my challenge. So send me your game and I'll analyze it. So he was the first one to do it. So look at what Neal's doing. So mastering basic tactics update. He created 8,000 flashcards under 6,000 base, about 6,000 basic, 1,800 intermediate, and he mastered 4,800, being able to solve them in under 10 seconds a card in 24 months. That's dedication. So it's really, for me, it's really inspirational to see what he's doing with that. Let me make sure. Let me make sure we're good. Is it recording? Okay. 5 minutes in. All right. Looks like we're good. Okay. So yeah, I would definitely recommend following him at Neal Bruce BC on Twitter, and love chess and lifelong learning. It's good stuff. So hopefully Neal will get something out of this analysis, and hopefully you'll get something out of it too. And go ahead and send me your games as well if you like what I'm doing with the analysis here. So let's jump on the analysis board. So what I did is I just went on lichess.org, lichess.org. I like that site. It's really easy to use. They have the cool like variants. I think they were one of the first ones to do that with, or maybe the first with Chess 960, Fisher Random Chess. Keeps it interesting, so you don't keep on getting the same openings. They have like King of the Hill. They have all these cool things. It's a nice interface. So I just plugged in the PGN. He sent me the the chess moves. I just pasted it in there on the bottom. It's not showing anymore, but I pasted it there. And then the move showed up here. I used this open source software they have, Stockfish. So I'd recommend that. I think you can go on the Stockfish website and download it, or it's just all over the place on like different websites. The chess websites use it. So I used that to get some ideas, just make sure I didn't overlook anything. But again, like I mentioned in the first video, to not become overly dependent on computers. I think that's a problem. Okay, that's kind of like this issue that we're facing right now in society, right? But to benefit from the computers, to have them complement what we're doing and learn from them, like with this Alpha Zero match, that was really cool. If you look it up, Alpha Zero against Stockfish, by the way, it was in December. It was pretty cool. But not to become overly dependent on them. Because sometimes the things that the computers teach you, you may not even be able to apply some of that in a real game. Sometimes like these general human principles that we come up with of creativity, rules of thumb, some of those things are really valuable. So I'm going to get into some of that in this game. So let's delve into this game. And also I'm really going to focus on pawn structure. Just keep in mind throughout the game, pawn structure is going to come up a lot. That's really important. So after e4, e5. So this is standard opening. Has been popular for over 100 years. E4, e5, more than that. I mean, it goes. The first recorded game I think was in the 1400s. But obviously, chess is really old, over 1,000 years old, and I think the origins are still contested. Was it India? Was it the Middle East? Or something like cross-pollination? But anyway, this has been going on for a long time. E4, e5. Just control the center. It's symmetrical. I tend to like to break the symmetry, but for black, it's a solid choice. And it's not going to be so easy for white to just, because since white moves first, tries to go for the attack, it's not going to be so easy to just checkmate black right away, if you know how to defend against the 4-move checkmate and stuff. So yeah, black should be fine here. So especially in the Ruy Lopez, it's a very quiet game for the most part. It's called the Spanish game. So after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. This is the Ruy Lopez. So it tends to be a little bit more positional from e4, because e4 is really like known as the attacking opening. But the Ruy Lopez is pretty strategic. So I think we'll get a lot of good things in this game in terms of, again, pawn structure. And we'll see how this interplay of the pieces and the pawns comes into play. Okay, we're good. So bishop b5, a6. So let's get into the idea behind this, though. Why did this happen? Why bishop e5? So after knight f3, you see that white is attacking the e5 pawn. It's just you're developing with a tempo, we say, with a gain of time. It's tempo from Italian time, from the Latin. So we're attacking e5. Knight defends it. Okay, simple idea. Remove the defender. Right? It actually doesn't work out right away if you take it. So for example, if you take on c6 here, after a6, bishop takes c6, d takes c6, knight takes e5, queen goes to d4. I think that's the best way. Maybe queen e7 also. Seems like they're both interchangeable pretty much. So knight can go, queen can go to d4, and we have a fork, one of the basic tactics in chess, right? It comes up all the time. So you have the queen attacks the knight, attacks the pawn, and the knight's pretty much going to have to move, and the queen's going to take back. I mean, you could try and, well, you defend the knight with, I don't think you want to play f4. You'll be exposing the king. Either way, you're going to lose that pawn on e4 if you're playing with white here. So it's really not, I wouldn't recommend going for that right away, because notice that black has the bishop pair too. Black is totally fine here. Sure, doubled pawn, no big deal. It's a solid position. The bishop is already opened up, ready to come out. And yeah, I mean, the bishop pair is, as Jeremy Silman talks about, imbalances. So having these two bishops, that might give black a slight advantage. I always like the bishop pair, especially in an open position. Again, pawn structure. If the pawns are locked up, you don't really want the bishops as much, because then the benefit, the knight hopping over pieces, is going to benefit you. But in a relatively open position, this is like a semi-open position. Pawns are starting to go away from the center. These bishops might become monsters. You can see them, aiming, crisscrossing the position, gaining a lot of, control of a lot of squares, ready to swoop in. So we don't really want to do that. But the idea of bishop e5 is really just rapidly developing your pieces. Okay, there's three opening principles, the main things you want to do. One, control the center with your pawns and your knights and bishops. So you control the center, you bring out your knights and bishops quickly, your minor pieces, bring those out really quickly, and castle your king. So white is immediately ready to castle queenside. Now the question often comes up, should I castle kingside or queenside? It depends on the position, but generally speaking, this is easier because it's quicker to castle kingside, and the king tends to be safer on the king side, because on the queen side, he's a little bit closer to the center if he goes to c1. And that might be a little more open, so you often have to make an extra move. We call it a prophylactic move, safety move to get to b1. And sometimes things open up more. It just often doesn't work out to castle on that side. So generally, probably like 7 or 80% of the time, 90% of the time, you'll castle on the king side. But you do want to try to castle as quickly as possible. Again, as a rule of thumb, the rules are meant to be broken. That's one of the fun things about chess, and I think what leads to chess mastery is the ability to understand when to break the rules, and it's circumstantial. It's based on the unique circumstance, and just about every position that arises is going to be unique. Sure, there's some openings that are redundant, positions that have been played a bunch of times, but then you're going to arrive at a unique position at some point, and and the general you're going to have to understand the position, and you might throw aside some of these principles, but they are good guiding principles that you can keep in mind, like control the center. Bring out your pieces quickly, develop quickly, castle your king. So that's what's happening here. And this is always an option, right? White's always kind of playing with this option. I might take your knight. You don't know when, but I might take it. Or if you play d6, well, now your knight's pinned to the king if that happens. So black does the main response, a6. They're following book right now. And by the way, so Neal is playing with white. His opponent's playing with black, and they're both about, they're playing on the Internet Chess Club. It said they were both in the 1700s. So we call that class B. So basically you have these classes. I would say like 1,000 and under is pretty much beginner. You have like different levels of beginner, and then you get like different classes like 1,000 to 1,200. That's like a high beginner moving into intermediate, and then the intermediate level is maybe 1,200, 1,400, 1,400 to 1,600 is getting stronger, and then 1,600 to 1,800 is class B. That's you're starting to get up to A class. That A class is kind of knocking on the door. You're knocking on the door of expert. That's 1,800 to 2,000. So, and then 2,000 to 2,200 is expert. 2,200 and beyond is master. So I guess I would consider it a black belt without any stripes. So when you're at 2,200, that's like the baseline for expert. So the highest I've gotten is like 20 in the USCF is like 2260 something, and then in FIDE, World Chess Federation, was like 2230. So that was enough to get the candidate master, but really it's my goal. I want to get, my rating got knocked off a bit when I was in India over the summer. Some really strong kids, over the winter. But I'm hoping to recover, train hard on YouTube and elsewhere, and yeah, be able to get the FIDE master title. So let's get to the next part of the game. So bishop goes back to a4, knight goes to f6, attacking the pawn on e4. So again, the bishop could have taken on c6 right away, but there's really no need, given that we can't win the pawn right away, and we'll just hold on to the bishop here. I've even seen, actually, Bobby Fischer has done this. There's a line where you can take. You can look into that. But the main line is just to drop back and keep your options flexible. So knight comes to f6, immediately attacking the pawn on e4, and the king castles. So when you castle, you're allowing the knight to take on e4. And people do this for the Berlin defense. It's really popular. But after knight takes e4, pawn goes to d4. So what I was going to say is nobody really likes to take here, because that looks pretty risky to have this rook come out and your knight is just on this open line. That's why you want to castle quickly. So you don't really want to open up the e file. That's the last thing you want to do when your king is there. I looked into those. I was just kind of curious. It's a fun line, actually. So if they do this, after knight takes e4, pawn d4, inviting them to open it up. So they take. Let's say they're getting greedy, going for pawns. Rook comes to e1, pawn goes to d5. I really don't think you want to play this move. Pawn f5. That's going to be really weakening. So pawn goes to d5 to defend it. Knight takes d4. Now we have two attackers on c6. Only one defender. So that looks pretty dangerous. But now the main move is bishop goes to d6. This is what most masters have been playing. I looked it up. I just used chess.com's Opening Explorer. That's pretty useful. I'd also recommend 365chess.com. That's free. Just give them your email. It gives you access to a lot of things. The cool thing about 365chess.com is you can see the frequency of games that have been played by a certain player. So like, let's say you're looking at this line right now, or like maybe a few moves earlier in the Ruy Lopez, you can see a certain player with the white pieces or black pieces. Let's say a grandmaster you like. You say, oh, this grandmaster played it 50 times in their career, okay, and they won like 70% of the time. Oh, they must know what they're doing. Well, I'm gonna look at their games. I did that a lot with Tiviakov with the Dragon. I used to play the Dragon a lot. So Tiviakov is like, he came up with a lot of great ideas in the Dragon. He was awesome at it. So just looked up. I realized that through 365chess.com actually. So then I found all these games of Tiviakov, and I just started looking through all of them. So I really recommend that. That's a useful thing you can do. Is just look at grandmaster games in the openings you like to play. Don't worry so much about the particular moves. Like, yeah, you need to know some sharp lines, like this line, which we're going to see. You need to know these lines, like traps and things like that. But beyond that, it's really about the ideas, the pawn structure, the basic setup that you want. So bishop goes to d6. Knight takes c6. And white's able to get away with this. This is tricky. Bishop takes on h2 check. So basically, white says, hey, I'm just going to move my king over. Now, how are you going to deal with all this? I just took your pawn on c6. If you take back, then this is going to be a fork when the bishop takes, hitting the rook and the king after that pawn's gone. And I also have this pin on you here on the knight. Knight's pinned, threatening f3, winning the knight at will. White can do that anytime they want. And this bishop is also hanging. So the thing is, though, that black has this resource now, queen h4. But, of course, white's already calculated this or knows the line. Rook takes, d takes. Now, if the queen takes, then the queen's just leaving, just leaving this. Now that the bishop can be taken, the knight can move and have this check on the king. That doesn't seem like it's such a big deal. So the pawn takes. Now, this is interesting. So they still have this threat, this on the king. The bishop's starting to move over. Doesn't look like it'll be checkmate, but it's just dangerous. If this bishop moves, checking the king, the queen starts invading the enemy territory. It doesn't look that good. So let's just keep it simple. If you have the chance, if you think you can win, if you have the choice between a really complicated line and a simpler solution, usually you should go with the simple solution, or we call it simple chess. Sometimes simple chess just wins. So in this case, well, this is not actually that simple, but it ends up being simple because you're liquidating, simplifying the position. So you go queen d8 check. It looks crazy. You're just like, why are you going down there? This looks like that famous Lasker game. But you're not playing for checkmate. You're just trying to get rid of that queen. See, the queens are looking at each other now. So obviously, if they don't do anything, well, they're going to be checkmated. So the queen has to take. The knight just takes it. But now look at the problem. Oh, it's with the check. Look at that. When you take, you're unleashing the bishop. And now this bishop is going to be taken next. After king has to take the knight. And then you take here. Now this is interesting because theoretically black is not material if we're going to be materialistic about it and count every single pawn. But look at the pieces. Once white gets his pieces out, so we have rook for rook, we have bishop for bishop, and then you see what's left. That's a really easy way to determine how many pieces are left. Sometimes people like to look on the side and see a lot of my younger students doing that. They'll be like, oh, wait, let me try and count the pieces. What if a piece fell on the floor or something? It's just easier to cancel out the pieces. And now you see we have knight and bishop for rook, right? So obviously white's a little, needs to develop those pieces. But once white gets those pieces out, they should be doing pretty well. And even though black has an extra pawn, extra pawn, so we have 5, 6, 6 for, oh, sorry, 2 pawns, right? So we have 3, 6, 7 for 5. So black's up 2 pawns. So it's like 2 pawns and a rook for a bishop and a knight. That's the material imbalance that we have. So this is actually pretty good for white though. The computer thought that white has like plus 0.5, which is like being up half a pawn in value. I agree. I think it is good for white because the knight and bishop just tend to overwhelm the rook, and also the king is going to be subjected possibly to an onslaught by all these pieces, and probably you'll pick up a pawn anyway because those 2 pieces. So each one's weaker, right? You have a knight and a bishop. Each one's weaker than a rook itself, which is 5 points. They're each 3 points. But when you add them together, you can pile up on pawns. A rook can't defend against 2 of them, right? So that's one of the benefits of having those 2 pieces against one. It reminds me of that Fischer's game of the century where he gives up his queen, but he ends up yielding like a rook in 2 different pieces and pawns and everything, and he just beautifully maneuvers his pieces, coordinates everything. I really recommend that game of the century by Fischer. So let's see what actually happened in the game. Sometimes I'll do some asides, but I'll try to get one of my students. She said that she prefers if I just go more direct instead of doing all the sidelines. But I do think the sidelines are interesting because I think it's kind of like we're getting at the truth of chess, right? We're trying to really figure out what the truth of this position is. So the sidelines are really just like specifying or almost testing. It's like we're testing out, seeing different ideas. Think of it like you're doing experiments in your mind. Like we're playing them out, but during a chess game, you're running little experiments in your mind. That's what the computer's doing all the time too. When it's evaluating tons of positions, right? Like millions of possibilities. We might be evaluating like 10 possibilities, 20 possibilities, but that's pretty much why it's important. We're trying to get to the truth of the position, get a good evaluation for every single candidate move we come up with. And you can see on the right of the screen here, some of these, like we have these trees. These are essentially calculation trees. So one option, another option and one option that branches off a few different ways. So it's really important to understand what's going to happen. We want to come up with some shortcuts by finding the key candidate moves, the key possibilities that can happen in each game. So that's I think it gets into that. Is that Soltis, the inner game of chess? Inner game of chess gets into calculation, or think like a grandmaster. That's classic. That's classic for calculation trees. I'd recommend that if you have some time to read a good classic book. Think Like a Grandmaster by Kotov. So knight f6, attacking the pawn. We castle. So again, allowing the knight to take the pawn. Say, go ahead, take it. You're going to get in big trouble on the e file with your king there. So the bishop blocks. Now he says, well, now that I'm blocked, you might want to worry about the e4 pawn. So the rook comes out, defends the pawn. And now that white defends the pawn, now this pawn's under attack. So this is kind of one of the ideas early on in the Ruy Lopez. So you can look into more videos on the Ruy Lopez if you're interested in this opening in particular. But we're gonna really get into the meat of it, in the pawn structure and the middle game, the plans that arise, and the tactics too. There's some pretty cool tactics in this game. So rook e1, b5. So now black says, all right, I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of your bishop, get him off that diagonal since you were pressuring on my knight, indirectly attacking the pawn. Now that you've dealt with your e4 pawn, I have to worry about my e5 pawn. So a little give and take there, tit for tat. So we go back to b3. And now black does the same thing of strengthening his pawn on e5, just like how white did rook e1, strengthening e4. So by strengthening e5, black actually wants to play knight a5 a lot of times. And that knight can try and take the bishop, and again, get that bishop pair, which is often an advantage, or at least as Silman talks about, an imbalance. Again, those imbalances are really important. You want to try to create an imbalance that you can work with. Like for example, if you have 2 bishops against the knights, or if you have the knights, you want to create a closed position, and that's going to favor the knights and shut down the bishops, since the knights can hop over the pawns. So you want to create the right environment that's going to favor your imbalance, and you want to make it obviously an environment that doesn't favor your opponents. So that's really one of the key ways that if you're not sure what to do, come up in terms of coming up with a plan. In the opening, try to create an imbalance. So that might be something that black wants to do, get that bishop pair and then tear the position open when the bishops are just going to, shoot into white's position. So of course, we need to think about what our opponent's doing. That's one of the key things I tell my students, especially my younger students, just every single move your opponent makes, say, what is my opponent trying to do? So after d6, it seems like an innocent enough move. It's just a conservative setup where, black is just defending the pawns, nice pawn chain, not really doing too much. which is just basic development. But that knight a5 is now an idea. So you want to try to be really sensitive to those ideas of your opponent. And I think that's really what separates intermediate players from more advanced players, the ones that are the most sensitive to their opponent's ideas, listening to their opponent. And that can help you in life too, in terms of not shouting over people if you tend to not be a good listener. And also just getting it, and I've worked on that myself, and chess has definitely helped with that, as opposed to real life experience. I mean, in addition to real life experiences, chess can be, again, it's like an experiment. It gives us this battleground where we can think things out, we can come up with these models, and we can apply it to our lives, obviously. So pawn d6, pawn h3. Now this is really the first thing that might be a tiny inaccuracy. I mean, Neal played a really good game, and this is not really a big deal. But I was looking this up because I was interested. And I should mention that I don't really play the Ruy Lopez. I play more. I play the English a lot. That's been my main opening. English or D4 type setups, maybe knight F3 the first move. So I like to play really flexible setups. Don't really show my cards, and then I'll go for the initiative, right? Or I'll try to understand the structure. But then once I have the chance, I go for the initiative. I take control of the game, and then I'll just try to blow my opponent off the board. But that's only once I feel like it's justified. So we all have different styles, but it really, but when it comes down to it, it depends on the position. The main way you can really use your style is in the opening, your opening choice. So h3 is an interesting choice. It seems to me like maybe Neal was just afraid of bishop g4. So you don't want to see ghosts, right? The thing is, you have to ask yourself, is it a ghost or is it a real threat, right? Bishop going to g4. Now the thing is, if you play the Ruy Lopez, you'll see that this comes up all the time, where that bishop gets kicked off g4. So it's usually not a good square for us. You might not know that otherwise, but now we're going to know that. And if you look at Grandmaster games, which I really recommend, again, as I mentioned with 365chess.com or ChessBase, if you want to get really into it. And ChessBase India has done a really good job with when I mentioned I was in India over the winter, and I met the really good team on ChessBase India, and they are basically trying to make it affordable for people across India to have access to those really good databases, so you can learn from these grandmaster games or master level games and learn what you can do in these positions. I mean, hey, it might be nice if we could just play three. I love playing chess 960 and get away from all the openings, but if you're going to play standard tournaments, you kind of have to know it. So at least know the basic plans. Again, focusing on what the grandmasters do, and also just knowing a few lines, the key lines. So after d6, h3 looks like it wants to stop the bishop, but I just want to show you that you don't really need to worry about this. So c3 is the main move. So okay, let's say they go bishop h4. You can play h3, bishop drops back to h5, and then you can play d3. You can just play really solidly like this, and this is a fine way to play. A little bit less dynamic than d4. Going for the gusto, going for the initiative. That's probably the way I'd recommend. But after h3, and again, you don't even have to play h3. You can actually play c3 immediately. So c3, bishop g4, let's say that happens. Now instead of h3, so now I have to find out which line that was. I think it was, instead of h3, we had the option of, I think it was with the immediate d4. So you just play d4 immediately, king castles, bishop comes in, secures the d4 square. Now the knight, it looks like the knight can take on e4, but then you have bishop to d5. Both knights are going to be hanging if the knight takes. See? So there's a fork right there. I think that, yeah, black would have no way out of that if white goes bishop d5. So it's we call it, the pawn is taboo. It's immune to capture. So, oops. So after bishop b3, securing the center, knight a5, and that's, if you were wondering why to play c3, that's one of the key ideas. We're not only supporting the d4 push, now we're fighting for the dark squares in addition to the light squares, which white was already fighting for. We're often playing either a light square game or a dark square game based on the pawns. But now the bishop can tuck away to c2. And it looks like it's not doing much. Well, securing the pawn on e4, but this bishop is often really powerful on this diagonal. So after bishop c2, knight c4, hitting the bishop on e3, and the pawn on b2. It's like a fork. Funny enough, the bishop just goes back to c1. You kind of have to waste a move, but the knight's not going to stay there for long. So after c5, kick the knight goes back, and then you just develop your knight, and now you're defending this knight on f3. And there's actually this really typical idea in the Ruy Lopez, where the knight goes to f1, and then comes to e3, or to g3. So if the knight goes to g3, it controls h5. Then you can play h3. Bishop can't go back without getting taken. If it goes to e3, it hits d5 and f5. Notice that's a weakness. Both pawns moved here. Both pawns advanced, c5 and e5. That means e5 is weak. Again, pawn structure dictates where our pieces can go. Our pieces can try to take advantage of that weak square, maybe open up the file, get our pieces coming in here. That d6 square is weak as well. It's just no pawns to protect it. Every time you push a pawn, you leave weaknesses in its wake. So be careful. Find that balance between attack and defense. Looks like I need some plug-in soon. All right. So knight bd2. So let's say they take on d4. This is just a sample line. Like this has been played by some masters, just to show you how you could handle this. Pawn takes. Let's say they take here. Bishop comes to e2. That pawn's not going anywhere on d4. It'll recapture. Notice that black's pawns are fragmented too. It was kind of nice when it was here and here. But once you take, the pawns are fragmented, and once you get that pawn back, you'll see how nice white's pawn structure becomes. So let's say the knight goes back. You can do queen b1 to get off the pin. And now we're looking at that diagonal. It's kind of a computer move, but I think people have played this after. Let's say bishop b2, rook c8, for example. Also, queen b1 was played. Knight moves, and you just get the pawn back. So again, the key is though that knight defends the other knight, because you don't want this. I don't know how it would happen. Let's say the queen moved like something weird, like let's say just moved off the pin. So you get off the pin, but then of course black is going to go here, and people will sometimes give up a rook for a knight. They'll give up the exchange sometimes just to create these weaknesses, to fragment the king's pawn structure. So you really don't want that. But the idea is that the knight goes to d2, securing the other knight. And of course, we know this knight's going to take a much longer journey, but temporarily on its way, it secures the other knight on f3, so you don't have to destroy your pawn structure. If they take, okay, they trade, and if they take again, that bishop comes out, eyeing the d4 pawn. It's going to be recaptured easily. Knight, and if knight moves, queen b1, and again, the rook c8 line, queen b1, knight f to d7, knight takes d4, knight e5, knight f1, centralizing the knight here, by the way, knight f1. So now we're making that maneuver, and the knight's heading to the promised land, e3, when it can hit that weakness on d5 again. Remember, those pawns are not there anymore, so there's no way that a pawn could defend that. They'll always aim at that, and this one. Both of them are controlled by that key pawn on e4. That's going to dictate, again, where our pieces are going to be able to land, get an outpost for our knight on those good squares. So after knight e3, oops, sorry. If bishop retreats, let's say, if it doesn't want to get hit by the knight, hit the knight, and then go to e3. So now we get where we want. The two pawns in the center. These knights are really good. So again, we've achieved those opening goals. King is castled. Yeah, you opened up your king a little bit. The king could always move over if he needs to, because every time you move the f pawn, you got to be real careful, especially early in the game. Watch out for that diagonal. So again, be very careful about those pawn moves. But after knight c6, knight e3, it looks pretty good for white. Yeah, white has that control, has two knights in the center, two pawns in the center, and those monster bishops. This one's shooting across here. Always kind of think of it like x-rays. Try to imagine what's going to happen if you move your pieces out of the way, right? It's sort of like molding the position with your mind in a way. That's one of the fun things about chess. So it really helps with your visualization. So imagine like what's going to happen if this pawn pushes. Well, then you unleash your bishop and queen. You could take the pawn on h7. So imagine if this knight moves. If it comes here, let me get rid of all those arrows. If the knight goes here, well, then you're going to unleash your bishop, and you're hitting here. That's what we call a focal point from Vukovic from The Art of Attacking Chess. I love those chess books. I hope that you guys will read some chess books as opposed to, just online stuff. So knight f5, hitting the pawn on g7. So that you really want to target those weak points in your opponent's position. So that would be a really good, like just a sample line of what can happen if you play c3 right away, and you don't even worry about all this h3 stuff. Again, I think it's a ghost threat. I'm not sure what Neal thought. Maybe he can write some like a YouTube response or on Twitter or whatever he wants to do. But Neal, hopefully, hopefully gets some ideas from the c3 line, and let me know what you think about this, about whether you need to play h3 or not. So I don't think you do. Like now that you know this plan about the knight dealing with it, I think you can just avoid it. So anyway, here's what happens though. It sort of transposes because you end up playing c3 the next move. Neal plays c3 here, and again allowing that knight sorry, if the knight comes to a5, the bishop can tuck back on c2. So you're giving that square possibility. Okay. I mean, I guess the knight could have come here, so we could have had that imbalance earlier. But since black didn't opt to do that, now white pretty much takes away that option. The knight goes to a5 anyway. Okay, bishop tucks away on c2. Pawn goes to c5. So here black's gaining some space. But again, just like we looked at in the other line, where's the weak square? Try to think about where the weak squares are on this. One square in particular, just this glaring weakness in black's position on black's side of the board. d5. Because there's just no pawns that are able to control that square. And once you make that decision, you can't go back. It would be nice to have the pawn on c6 now, or maybe to have this pawn come to, oftentimes doubling is good, coming to e6, controlling those weak squares. Also, the f5 square might become a weakness, or if you, let's say you get a knight there, then they might have to play g6, which is actually provoking a weakness. When you play g6, you weaken h6 and f6. So then you have the bishop coming in. So everything has a consequence. All the pawns are connected. So again, that pawn structure is so important. So c5, but this is all main line. This is all standard stuff. Then we have d4. Queen goes to c7. This was an important moment. Playing d4. I think it's a good move. Neal is playing all the best moves. These after the questionable h3, this is all basically book. So many grandmasters and other masters have played this before. So pawn goes to d4, and now you have the option of opening up the line anytime we want, and we can maybe double up our rooks on the d file. Again, take advantage of those weaknesses here, and just gaining space. So we have two pawns in the center. Black has one pawn here, one pawn kind of off the center. But you can see that black has a dark squared game here. Black is playing on the dark squares based on where the pawns are. White was playing just on the light squares, controlling these. That's the strengths. But now you can see white with this move, this very aggressive move. White is now challenging black on the dark squares as well. And some lines might open up. Okay, so after d4, queen goes to c7. So now anticipating maybe the c file opening. And also getting off the d file. It'd be real nice if the rook can go here, x-raying that line, looking at the queen. Make that queen uncomfortable in d1. Always trying to think about what's awkward about your opponent's position. How can you exploit that? Anytime they make a questionable move, it'd be like a hawk, right? You're always looking for opportunities to exploit your opponent's weaknesses. So queen c7. Now we get the knight b2 move, also standard. That's a good move. Okay, so his opponent decides to play a more open game, pushing. Sorry, not pushing, taking. I was going to say maybe they could push, but then they're kind of giving up the tension in the center. Sometimes it's good to keep more tension in the center. I mean, there are some lines where white even pushes on. Sometimes white will break like this, a pawn break. Try to take advantage, because not just the d5 square, but look at all these pawns were gone. So these squares can never be protected by pawns again. So you can see that white can create an offensive on the queen side, open up those lines. See, there's lots of weaknesses in there. So c takes d4 seems good. I think that's the main line. Takes back. Bishop develops. Seems a bit weird. I think maybe the bishop would come here, but I think this is standard on d7, because maybe at some point you can imagine the pawn pushing to b4. You think about what's the future for my bishop? If the pawn goes to b4, well, then the bishop might come to b5, aiming directly into white's position. So, and just getting the bishop out of the way, really. Because there's other than b7, there's nowhere else good to go now that he played h3. You might provoke him and go to e6, but then you'll get hit with d5. Unless, again, if you really want to provoke that, that's possible. But the main thing is to go to d7 and clear the line for the rooks, connecting your rooks. Once you connect your rooks, we say basically you've completed your development. You don't have to worry as much about back rank checkmates. Your rooks can quickly come in the game, but the rooks usually come last because they come after files open up. Now that we have the open file, the black's rooks would like to swing over there, make use of that. Maybe possibly the e file too. That could open up if the pawn takes, become a half open file. This is a fully open file because there's no pawns. If we take one of the pawns, there's one pawn left, that would be a half open file. We can imagine the rook's getting active. Maybe the pawn's pushing, support the pawn's pushing at some point. But again, black does have some weaknesses, so it's kind of this tension. White's position's more solid, and he's got this control of these squares. Black has some weaknesses, but he's got some dynamic play on maybe the c file and the queen side. So really breaking down the components of the position, right? Always want to break down the imbalances in each position. It's based on pawn structure, what minor pieces you have, what weak squares there are, things like that. Again, from Jeremy Silman, I recommend How to Reassess Your Chess. And it's a really good way of coming up with lucid plans. Just like, again, that visualization. He talks about coming up with a dream position, or as Demo Werner, an IM I worked with once when I was playing in Hungary. He was helping me prepare for some of the games, and he's focused on two things. I'll give a shout out to International Master Demo Werner, and he says to maximize your pieces, always try to put your pieces on the strongest squares possible, and come up with a good setup. So it's kind of like that dream position I mentioned. Well, first, that might be a basic setup in the opening, but you really want to have this ambitious setup in mind. What's the best thing I can achieve from this position? That's really what you want to do. So shout out to Demo Werner. If you know him, let him know that. Hopefully he doesn't mind that I shared that. But I think it's a good universal principle. I mean, I imagine he wasn't the first to say it, but he's the only one that said that to me about maximize your pieces. And it's just this maximalist approach. If you can do it, that should be your default anyway. And then hey, if you have to play a defensive move, that's fine. Always consider the defense as well. But your default should be to attack. So takes back, bishop d7. Now we begin that knight maneuver, right? The knight goes to f1, and again, either g3 or e3. Fischer did that all the time. You can look at Bobby Fischer games. Again, look at the opening, look at the opening book, look in 365chess.com or chess.com or chessbase. Look at Bobby Fischer games where he often goes to e3 or g3, and the knight lands on f5 usually, launches that attack against g7 or g6. I mean, there's just so many possibilities once you can sink your knight deep in the enemy territory like that. So knight f1, get it. Knight c6 comes back, puts a little more pressure on the center, on the dark squares. So he secures the dark squares while developing. Makes sense. And now he says, hey, your queen is on c7, sorry. So the rook can go to c1 and x-ray the queen, just like maybe black could go rook here, x-raying white's queen. So we're really, we're thinking for both sides about what are our capabilities, what are our opponent's capabilities based on the pawn structure, based on where the pieces are. We have to know our resources and our opponent's resources all the time. I think I should probably plug it in, but I'm gonna have to move in a second. So knight comes into b4. This was interesting. So bishop b3, knight b4 hitting the bishop. Now, Neal decided to go bishop b3. So actually I saw there a couple games where white won by playing a sort of counterintuitive move, bringing the bishop back to b1. But again, this bishop is often important on this diagonal. You don't really need to defend the pawn on e4, as it turns out. But this diagonal ends up being really useful. But going to b3 was totally fine too. So just 1 second. Let me plug this in.